Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Sip and Talk.
Your buddies, Joe and Sunny, coming at you.
That's right.
Straight from America.
Straight from America.
Just a couple of regular Americans here.
Regular dudes.
Ready to, deep dive into something that seems to be on a lot of people's minds lately.
A lot of people are talking about this.
You guys are awesome.
That's right.
And you were really, really awesome with the feedback.
Absolutely.
After our last deep dive on Marco Rubio.
Oh, yeah. Marco Rubio.
Man, so many messages. So many emails.
Yes. Tons of feedback.
And one thing that just kept coming up again and again.
I know.
This whole idea of a China threat.
Yeah, the China threat. What does it all mean?
You were curious.
Yeah.
You had questions.
Sure.
You wanted us to really get our hands dirty.
Yeah.
And figure out what is what.
Absolutely.
And, we listen to you guys.
We listen to our listeners.
So this time around.
That's right.
That is exactly what we are tackling.
Head on.
So we have been digging through articles, reports.
All that good stuff.
The whole shebang to try to make sense of this thing.
The whole 9 yards.
Make sense of why China is seen by so many countries around the globe as this potential threat. So many people are saying it.
Right, exactly.
Like, what's the deal? Why the worry?
Yeah.
And then the big one.
Oh, yeah?
Taiwan. What is with this China-Taiwan obsession?
Right. Everyone wants to know.
Does taking Taiwan mean they're planning to paint the whole world red?
Yeah.
That classic question, is the whole world...
Is the whole world...
a part of China?
Yeah, that's what everybody's asking.
We are going to get into that.
Absolutely.
And we are going to also weigh the potential good and bad for China if they actually manage to take Taiwan.
So that's the game plan.
So that's our plan.
Keep it casual, keep it fun, but keep it informative.
Exactly.
So we'll share what we found in our research.
Yeah.
We'll throw in our 2 cents, just regular folks.
Yeah. Just 2 regular American dudes.
Just 2 regular American dudes, trying to understand this complex issue and hopefully give you guys some solid takeaways.
Yeah.
Without, needing to go get a PhD in international relations.
Exactly. You don't have to be an expert. So let's jump right in.
Let's do it.
Why is China seen as this threat to the civilized world?
Yeah.
What's behind that perception?
Okay. So there's definitely been a shift, right?
It does feel like there's been a shift, like not that long ago.
Yeah.
Everything was about trade and,
Investment,
yeah.
Right.
Maybe a couple friendly basketball games.
Uh-huh.
But now things feel a lot more...
tense. Yeah, you're right. The vibe has definitely shifted.
Yeah.
It's gotten a little bit more serious and,
Yeah.
I think that shift is largely due to, a real downturn in relations between China and a number of countries.
Yeah.
And there's a few reasons for that.
Yeah.
We can point to a few things.
Yeah, give us some specifics.
Yeah, you think about the Hong Kong anti-extradition movement back in 2019.
Yeah.
A lot of people took to the streets to protect their freedoms.
Yeah.
They were really trying to hold on to that autonomy that they had. And then you have the Chinese Communist Party really making efforts to push their message globally.
Uh-huh.
And sometimes in ways that just haven't sat well with other nations.
Right. It's not always the message, it's the way they deliver it.
It's the delivery. Exactly.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we have to talk about the allegations of genocide against the Uyghur population in Xinjiang.
Yeah.
This has cast a really dark shadow over China's international image.
You hear about these things,
Yeah.
and it does make you wonder, it's not just about different political systems anymore. It feels like there's a clash
Absolutely.
in values.
Yeah.
When you're talking about human rights and democratic principles and things like that.
You hit the nail on the head. It's a values clash.
Yeah.
And it's not just talk.
Right.
A lot of countries have actually started putting policies in place.
Give us some examples.
Yeah, a really visible example is the restrictions we're seeing on Chinese-made software, like TikTok.
Right.
And WeChat.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like every other week there's another headline about a ban somewhere.
Tell me about it. My niece is constantly complaining about whether she can use TikTok on her school's Wi-Fi.
That's right.
It's definitely mainstream now.
It's everywhere.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Taiwan, for example, has put restrictions on these apps on government devices and networks.
Okay.
The European Parliament has gone as far as telling its employees to ditch TikTok altogether.
Oh.
In the U.S., federal employees can't have TikTok on their government phones.
Right.
Some universities are blocking it on their Wi-Fi networks.
Yeah. So it's not just governments.
No, it's spreading.
Being paranoid.
Yeah.
It's other institutions, too.
Absolutely. And it's not just Western countries either.
Okay.
India has completely banned TikTok. And a whole bunch of other Chinese apps citing national security concerns. Afghanistan, Pakistan, Canada, and even Russia have all taken steps to either ban or restrict TikTok to varying degrees.
Wow.
It's interesting. Russia actually suspended local TikTok operations and banned WeChat for government use way back in March 2022.
Okay.
So this suggests a pretty widespread concern across different parts of the world.
Yeah, it's not just a Western thing.
Not at all, no.
Okay, so that's the digital front. What about efforts to push back against what some are seeing as the Chinese Communist Party?
Yeah.
Trying to sneak its influence into other countries' political systems.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Are we talking about, like, are countries actively trying to block pro-Beijing political groups from forming?
So that's where things get a little bit complicated.
Okay.
We looked into whether countries allow explicitly pro-Beijing political parties.
Okay.
You know, actually formally and in Taiwan, you definitely have parties like the New Party and the Unification Promotion Party. And even some factions within the KMT have closer ties to Beijing.
Sure.
But when you look at places like Singapore, Germany, the U.S. and Canada, we didn't really find clear-cut examples of explicitly pro-Beijing parties having a ton of political power or being formally restricted in a widespread way.
So they're there, but they're not a major force.
They're there, but they're not calling the shots.
Right.
It seems to be more about monitoring and being aware of potential influence.
Well, so it's more about keeping an eye on things.
Exactly, keeping an eye on things.
Rather than outright bans in most of these places.
Yeah.
What about something like visas for spouses from mainland China?
Oh, that's a tricky one.
Yeah, you got to balance, you know, family and security.
Absolutely. Family reunification is important.
Right.
But you also think about security implications.
Yeah.
So what we found was that a lot of these countries have these policies regarding visas for spouses from mainland China. But we don't have a lot of specific details on who offers special treatment.
Right.
Or exactly how it all works.
Right. It's kind of a black box.
It's a bit of a black box, yeah. It's definitely an area where governments have to carefully weigh those family rights against potential security concerns.
Yeah.
And, you know, the possibility of undue influence.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
You don't want to keep families apart.
No.
But you also got to be careful.
You got to be vigilant.
And then there's the whole thing about Chinese companies.
Yeah.
Especially state-backed ones, investing in important industries in other countries.
Yeah.
That feels like a growing worry these days.
It is a big concern, particularly when it comes to things like technology and infrastructure.
Right. You're talking about the stuff that really matters.
Yeah, exactly. The backbone of the economy.
Yeah.
So Singapore, for example, they're a major financial hub, right? And naturally, you have Chinese banks operating there.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But then you look at Germany, and they've been really tightening the reins.
Okay.
On investments from companies like Huawei and ZTE.
Yeah, those are the big ones.
Those are the big telecom companies.
Yeah.
And they don't want them getting too involved in their critical infrastructure.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
You don't want them controlling your communications network.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the U.S. and Canada have both been, you know, generally increasing scrutiny and restrictions on investments from entities that are seen as closely linked to the Chinese government.
Okay.
Particularly in key sectors.
Yeah, got to protect those key sectors.
Got to protect the crown jewels. The idea is to prevent them from gaining too much control or influence over strategically important parts of their economies.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
What about something that's a little more symbolic, like flying the Chinese national flag?
Oh, yeah.
Has that caused any issues?
You'd be surprised.
Okay.
It's actually been a source of tension in a few places. Yeah, there have been discussions and even some, you know, outright disagreements about the public display of the Chinese flag in places like Taiwan, Singapore, the U.S., and Canada.
You wouldn't think that that would be a huge deal.
Yeah.
But I guess...
But symbols matter.
Symbols do matter.
Yeah. It often gets tied up in broader conversations about national identity, sovereignty, and, you know, where people's loyalties lie.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, another one that I've heard a lot about are these Confucius Institutes.
Oh, yeah, the Confucius Institutes.
At universities?
They've become pretty controversial.
Okay, what's the deal with them?
So Confucius Institutes are basically these cultural and educational centers. They're affiliated with the Chinese Ministry of Education. And they've popped up at universities all over the world. But they've become increasingly controversial.
Why is that?
Well, there are concerns about academic freedom and the potential for the Chinese Communist Party to exert influence on what's being taught.
Right. So universities are basically worried about censorship.
Censorship, yeah.
Academic integrity.
Academic integrity. They want to protect their independence.
Right.
And their ability to teach and research freely.
Yeah.
Without any outside pressure.
Okay.
So Germany, for example, they've been encouraging their universities to end their partnerships with these institutes.
Okay.
In the U.S., there have been investigations into some institutes that officially closed, but then seem to just pop back up under different names.
Wow. So they're sneaky.
Yeah, a little bit sneaky.
Yeah.
In Canada, we've seen some universities rebrand their Confucius Institutes. And the University of Toronto decided to end its cooperation altogether.
It sounds like they're trying to control the narrative.
Yeah, there's definitely a concern about that.
Yeah.
About them being a vehicle for something more than just language and culture.
Right. Okay, this is something relatively new.
Right.
These reports about Chinese overseas police stations.
Ooh, yeah.
This sounds like something straight out of a spy thriller.
It does a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But it is a serious issue that's being investigated by a number of governments.
So what's the deal with these?
So these are basically undeclared police outposts that are operating in foreign countries.
Okay.
And the concern is that they're being used to monitor and intimidate Chinese citizens living abroad.
Okay.
And even pressure them to return to China.
Wow.
Without going through proper legal channels.
So they're like bypassing the whole extradition process?
Exactly. It's a way to circumvent the normal legal procedures.
Yeah.
So Germany, for example, they've acknowledged that these stations are believed to be operating within their borders.
Okay.
The U.S. has gone as far as arresting individuals who they say were working as agents for these undeclared police outposts. And in Canada, the government has said very clearly that they will shut them down if they find any evidence of them operating.
It's a big deal.
Yeah, it's a really big deal.
So on top of all that we've talked about, we also looked at what different countries are doing to support groups that Beijing is accused of suppressing.
Right.
Like the people of Hong Kong and the Uyghurs.
Yeah, so this is a really important part of the international response.
Right.
After that crackdown in Hong Kong.
Right.
And the imposition of the national security law in 2020, many democratic countries stepped up.
Okay.
And offered support to Hong Kongers.
Good for them.
Yeah, there was even some talk about a little bit of a competition among English-speaking countries to try to attract those talented individuals and businesses that were leaving Hong Kong.
Right. They wanted that brain drain and all that capital to come to their country.
Exactly. Everyone wants a piece of that.
Yeah.
So countries like Australia, Canada, the UK, and Taiwan, they all lowered the bar for Hong Kong residents to apply for permanent residency.
That's great to see those countries offering a lifeline to people who felt like their freedoms were disappearing.
Right. They were losing their autonomy and their way of life.
Yeah.
So these countries stepped in.
What about sanctions?
Oh, sanctions, yeah.
Are we talking about using sanctions to hold Beijing accountable?
I just want to give another shout out to Mickey from Mickey to Life. His channel is a treasure trove of inspiration, and he's a huge Sip&Talk fan.
Absolutely. Make sure to check him out and maybe even share your awesome podcast intro with him once you've created it.
So Australia has a framework for targeted sanctions against individuals and entities involved in human rights abuses.
Right.
You've also seen politicians in Canada and the UK publicly support the idea of sanctions.
Okay.
And then, of course, you have the U.S.
Right.
with the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act,
right,
which allows for sanctions against individuals who are seen as undermining Hong Kong's autonomy.
It's interesting, though, because I know Taiwan has faced some criticism.
Oh, really?
For how it's been handling Hong Kongers who are seeking refuge there.
That's interesting.
There have been reports of tougher reviews of their immigration applications.
I didn't know that.
And some even point to past instances of restrictive measures.
That's really interesting.
You know, that maybe weren't so welcoming.
Right.
It just shows that even among those who are critical of Beijing, there can be different approaches and concerns.
Absolutely. It's complicated.
It's a complex issue.
Yeah.
It's not always black and white.
No, not at all.
What about the situation with the Uyghurs in Xinjiang?
Yeah, so in regards to the Uyghurs, the U.S. has passed the Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act.
Okay.
And then you have several countries, including Australia, Canada, the UK, the European Union, Taiwan, and the U.S.
Okay, so a pretty broad coalition.
A pretty broad coalition that have all imposed sanctions on officials and companies that they believe are involved in the human rights abuses in Xinjiang.
So they're targeting specific individuals.
Specific individuals and companies.
And organizations. Rather than like blanket sanctions against the entire country.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then Australia, Canada, and the U.S., they also have these general refugee visa arrangements.
Okay.
That could potentially be used by Uyghurs who are fleeing persecution.
So there are avenues.
There are avenues.
Yeah.
But it's a very difficult situation.
It's a huge issue.
It's a huge issue, and there are lots of obstacles to actually getting those refugees to safety.
Yeah. So there's international pressure for sure.
There is.
But it seems like the scale of the issue just makes it incredibly difficult.
It's a tough one.
Yeah, to address effectively.
Absolutely.
How has Beijing responded to all of this criticism and all these measures?
Their response has been pretty consistent.
Okay.
They deny any intention to misuse TikTok user data.
Okay.
They reject all accusations of genocide or human rights abuses in Xinjiang.
Right.
They argue that their policies are aimed at combating terrorism and poverty.
Okay.
And they often frame the actions taken by the U.S. and other countries as interference in their internal affairs.
Right.
And as attempts to disrupt normal international trade relations.
Right. They're saying we're the bad guys.
Yeah, they're saying we're the ones stirring the pot.
Yeah. Okay, so that gives us a pretty good picture of why a lot of the world is looking at China with this more critical eye these days and the kinds of actions that are being taken in response.
Absolutely.
Now let's get to the big question that I know is on everybody's minds.
Okay.
Why is China so fixated on Taiwan?
Right.
And if they do succeed in taking it, would that just be the start? I mean, are we talking about a plan for world domination here?
Right. Everyone wants to know.
Do they really believe that the whole world is or should be a part of China?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it?
It's the big
The million-dollar question.
Yeah.
So this is really at the heart of the China threat theory for a lot of people. And the U.S. and a lot of other countries are definitely worried about China's potential to expand its influence, particularly within what we call the First Island Chain.
Okay, the First Island Chain. What is that?
So the First Island Chain, it stretches from Japan down through Taiwan to the Philippines and beyond.
Right.
And it's seen as this really critical strategic barrier in the Pacific.
Okay, like a natural wall.
Yeah, kind of a natural wall or a defensive line.
Okay.
And the concerns are about maintaining regional stability, upholding, the current international rules-based order, and protecting their own national interests, and the interests of their allies.
Right, you got to look after your friends.
Got to look after your friends, exactly.
Yeah.
So why do these countries feel it's so important
to
prevent China from getting more control in this region?
Yeah, why does it matter so much?
Well, the biggest argument is about keeping the peace.
Right.
And ensuring the safety of allies like Japan, Taiwan, and the Philippines.
Right.
The U.S. has this Indo-Pacific strategy framework.
Right.
And it specifically talks about the need to defend countries within that First Island Chain.
Okay.
And that includes Taiwan.
Right.
And to prevent China from achieving air and sea dominance in the region.
Right. So it's about maintaining that balance of power.
Exactly. It's about making sure that no one player gets too powerful.
Okay. What else is driving this concern?
Well, another key factor is preventing China from controlling strategically important locations.
Right.
And Taiwan, as we mentioned, is right in the middle of that First Island Chain.
Right.
So if China were to take control of Taiwan,
yeah,
it would basically blow a huge hole in that defensive barrier.
Right.
And it could seriously threaten the security of Japan and the entire Western Pacific.
Wow.
There's a Chinese scholar named Guan Min.
Okay.
And he said that if Taiwan falls, the security of Japan and the Western Pacific would be in serious jeopardy.
Wow, that's a pretty serious statement.
It is a pretty serious statement, yeah.
Yeah.
And then you also have to consider that if China controls Taiwan, it gives them a much greater ability to project their military power further into the Pacific.
So it's a huge strategic advantage.
It's a huge strategic advantage.
Yeah.
We've seen these large-scale military exercises around Taiwan with aircraft carriers and fighter jets.
Well, that's a show of force.
Big show of force. A lot of people see this as a clear demonstration that China is ready and willing to use force, if necessary, to take Taiwan.
Right.
And that's seen as a direct challenge to regional stability.
Okay, so those are the arguments for why it's important to push back against China's expansion.
Right.
But are we maybe exaggerating the threat? Or could our efforts to contain China actually backfire and make things worse?
Yeah, there are definitely some alternative viewpoints out there.
Okay.
Some analysts argue that we might be overestimating China's military capabilities and their willingness to actually engage in a major conflict.
Okay.
You know, the Chinese military, despite its size and all its fancy new equipment, they haven't actually seen real combat in decades.
It's easy to look tough when you're not actually fighting anybody.
Exactly. War games are different from the real thing.
Yeah.
And there could be internal weaknesses that we just don't fully grasp.
You never know what's going on behind closed doors.
You never know what's happening behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And then, of course, from China's perspective, all of their actions regarding Taiwan are about maintaining national sovereignty and territorial integrity.
Right. They see it as their land.
They see Taiwan as a breakaway province.
Right.
And they view reunification as an internal matter.
Right.
So any foreign intervention, especially military support for Taiwan, or, you know, sending in troops or ships into the region, is seen by China as a provocation.
Okay.
And as an infringement on their sovereignty.
Right.
And that could actually increase the risk of conflict.
So basically they're saying we're the ones poking the bear.
They're saying we're the ones making things worse.
Yeah, it's a classic case of two sides.
Yeah.
Seeing the same situation in totally opposite ways.
Totally opposite ways.
Okay, let's play a little thought experiment here.
Okay, I like this.
What if China does take Taiwan?
Oh, wait.
What are the consequences?
Yeah.
What's really at stake here?
So the impacts would be huge.
Yeah.
And they would be felt all over the world.
Okay.
Geopolitically, it would completely change the balance of power in the Asia-Pacific.
Right.
And significantly increase China's influence.
Yeah.
The regional military landscape would be totally different.
Yeah.
And there's a real worry that China could use Taiwan as a forward operating base.
Right.
Potentially threatening its neighbors like Japan and the Philippines.
It would basically redraw the map of the region.
Yeah, it would be a whole new ballgame.
Yeah.
And then you have to think about the international order.
Right.
And those alliances that the U.S. has built up over decades.
Right.
If the U.S. fails to prevent China from taking Taiwan, it could seriously damage the credibility of U.S. security commitments to attempt.
It would look like they weren't able to back up their promises.
It would look like they weren't able to protect their friends.
Yeah.
And that could encourage other countries to pursue their own expansionist goals.
Right. It's like the whole world order starts to unravel.
It could lead to a lot more instability and conflict.
It's a scary thought.
It's a scary thought.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you have the economic chaos.
Oh, yeah. The economy.
Yeah. Taiwan is a major player in the global economy.
Yeah. Especially in tech.
Especially in the tech sector.
Right.
So if there was a conflict,
the
disruption to global supply chains would be massive.
Yeah.
Particularly in the semiconductor industry.
Right.
Companies like TSMC in Taiwan, they're absolutely vital.
Our phones, our computers.
Our phones, our computers.
Everything.
Our cars. Everything runs on those chips.
Right.
And then you'd also have massive disruptions to international shipping.
Right.
Through the Taiwan Strait.
Yeah, that's a major shipping lane.
Yeah, a major shipping lane.
Yeah.
So we'd likely see significant economic fallout all over the world.
Yeah, we all feel it.
We'd all feel it.
Yeah.
And then you can't forget about the people.
Right. The people in Taiwan.
The people living in Taiwan.
Yeah.
You know, there are serious concerns about human rights and political freedom.
Yeah.
If China were to take control, they would likely try to change Taiwan's democratic system.
Right.
And that could curtail the freedoms and human rights that the Taiwanese people currently enjoy.
It's a lot to think about.
It's a lot to think about.
It really is.
Yeah.
And we've seen these recent military exercises.
Yes, military exercises.
Around Taiwan.
Yeah, they're getting more frequent and more intense.
Yeah, and the U.S. military has said that they're confident they could win.
Right.
If China attacked early.
At least for now.
Yeah. It feels like we're on a knife's edge here.
It does feel like things could escalate pretty quickly.
Yeah, so back to that big question.
Okay.
Does China actually have a plan to take over the world?
Right.
I mean, is that really what's going on here?
Well, from what we can tell,